Now, down to business. So we're open until 6 p.m. today and until 1 p.m. from 1 to 6 p.m. tomorrow. And I encourage you this afternoon to seek out our 3 invigilators, who are Francis, Una and Maria, who can talk to you about their family histories, particularly Una, way back into the middle of the 1800s. So make sure you catch them. Anybody with a white badge will be able to help you. Tomorrow at 3 p.m, our local historian Alice Cullen, whose family has lived in Killiney for generations, will share her reflections of Killiney past. And now, I have the pleasure of introducing Michael McShane, who's here to my right. Michael and his wife Catherine have lived in Killiney for many, many years, and they are the hosts of the wonderful website killineyhistory.ie. And we are so lucky to have access to this rich resource, and I encourage you to take a look, because many of you might learn something about your own home that you never knew before. So ladies and gentlemen, Michael McShane.
Excuse me. Thanks very much for the introduction, Simone, and well done to all the volunteers in Killiney Residents Association for arranging today and for inviting me to make this presentation. And it's great to see so many of you here. The topic that I've chosen for today's talk is on the Killiney Houses of the Talbot estate. Now, the reason I've selected that topic is that the Killiney Residents Association area really comprises quite a bit of what used to be the old Talbot estate. And just give you an idea of where we are and the lie of the land, we're really looking at the townlands here. We've got the townlands of Scalp William Mavis, which is where the obelisk is. You've got Ballinclea and you've got Roches Hill, and the village lies within the townland of Roches Hill, not in the townland of Killiney. Killiney townland is actually south of the village and would have comprised the Gaynor estate, going down as far as Military Road, roughly that location there. So I'll be talking about 4 actually of the houses which returned, I could say, to the Talbot estate after a couple of centuries of an absence. And these houses are Ballinclea, which you can see here, Beechwood, which is over in this location. This is actually the graduate pub, Rochestown Avenue along here. Beechwood was located in this position where there's now a housing scheme. And then I'll be also talking about Plasnewyd, which is now known as Rock Lodge. I'll also be just giving a brief overview of Rochestown House itself. Rochestown House is really where the original family would have settled, and the estate would have been controlled from that location. This is the Killiney Village Residents Association area, and again you can see that's the hill, the obelisk. This is the village here, and it stretches down as far as the Vicar Road down to Mount Eagle, and goes to Strathmore Road, and then takes in Roches Hill, back up George's Avenue, Claremont Road, and Rock Lodge, and includes the Killiney Castle Hotel as well.
Michael, will you speak up a tiny little bit?
Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Louder.
Okay. Now this is the 1837 map of the district, and what this shows really is that it was open rolling countryside for the vast part, dotted with a few individual houses. We had the Killiney Castle here, we've got Bellevue, Rochestown House, Ballinclea and Beechwood. The village then is a cluster of smaller buildings located here at the junction of Killiney Hill Road. And really, there was the large estates, there was nothing else in there. This is now one of the earliest maps. This is the Roke map of 1760, and it's an interesting map. You've got again here we've got the obelisk. It's Captain Monsell was the occupier of the Killiney Castle at the time. You'll see that the obelisk was called Rochestown Obelisk because Rochestown was the seat of the estate, and Rochestown and the Mavis family who lived in Rochestown owned the soil of Roches Hill, Killiney Hill and Rochestown, and that estate stretched as far as right down to Dean's Grange, in fact. It was a very large estate. And again, very few houses, but again, you've got, that's I think, Bellevue in there, Rochestown House, and I'm going to give you a better version of the map now. Now, this is a very important document. This is the shared map of the Malpas or Mapes estate, and the Mapes family acquired the estate around the 1600s, and this map was prepared in 1787 showing the extent of that estate. And you can see from the map that this is the obelisk hill here. You've got Killiney Strand in this location. This is the junction, the graduate pub landmark here, Rochestown Avenue, and going up as far as Baker's Corner up to that location. So a very extensive estate. And the list of occupants and owners is shown here as well. And it's a very useful genealogical document apart from everything else. What?
Here, back there.
You hear okay? Yeah. Sorry, yeah. Just give me a shout if you can't hear it. So I went into the National Library and had a closer look at the map, and I managed to persuade one of the curators there to take it out of the plastic so I get a decent photograph of it. And what I discovered afterwards is that the accuracy of this map surprised me. The detail and the surveying skills that were put into this map are second to none. I was able to overlay this map on the current OS maps, and it matches pretty much spot on. So from that data, it's been possible to identify individual plots as they were set to tenants back in the day. So they're all numbered, labelled. This is the Rochestown House area itself. This Rochestown House here is again, that's the graduate pub junction at Rochestown Avenue, Ballinclea Road here. Bellevue is here, and you've got Beechwood in this location. So just to give you an idea, like the Rochestown House, I say, Stoneville was across the road. There was an ice house located just barely legible there. When I blew it up, just picked out obviously an ice house where they would have stored ice for the main house in that location there. So with that map, and combined with information which I managed to gather from the Bodleian Library, who actually hold the old estate papers, the old Talbot estate papers, stretching back to about 1780, around about the same time as the map, and up to about 1945. So there's rental records of leases. So it's been a very useful document to be able to identify the changes and the extent of the estate. I've just picked a couple of pages here just to give an idea of the information that is in there. And just for instance, you've got R.G. Talbot to Samuel Waterhouse, an agreement to lease part of a field of Killiney known as the Field of the Banqueting Hall. Now this has intrigued me for a while. I'm still trying to get to the bottom of it. I believe, from what I know at the moment, the Banqueting Hall was located where St. Mary's is now, just in the village here. And the location, obviously being where it is, you're at the peak of the hill, the traffic coming through, this would have been the spot for parties to come from the city to visit the area, to take in the views, take in the beach, and there would have been possibly banqueting tents, banqueting halls set up to cater for the visitors. So I'll just go back there one step, apologies. You've also got the Richard Gilbert Talbot to Bernard Larney. Larney was one of the innkeepers here, and this is a lease to Larney for the Victoria Hotel, which was the old, you may remember as the Jade's restaurant here, since demolished. It's now the small apartment scheme just below the pub here, and that was called the Victoria Hotel. That's dated 1856. Then you got Robert Warren to Gilbert Talbot, and this is a grant of the part of the domain of Loftus Hill, otherwise Mount Mapes or Roxburgh. And these were all the names that applied to Killiney Hill, Killiney Castle. So you had, over the years, Loftus Hill, you had Mount Mapes, Roxburgh, and it changed with the owners. As the owners were renewed, they would have applied their own names, and Mr. Loftus would have applied his name. And again, there's another mention of the banqueting hall up here. And there's a transfer then from, I guess, this one, which would be Mapes to Talbot. So this was a significant one in terms of what I'm talking about today. Mapes would have transferred to the Talbot family the lands of Rochestown, called the Hill of Rochestown, contained 38 acres. So that would have been a substantial part of the Hill of Rochestown transferring from the Mapes estate to the Talbot estate. Just to give an idea over the years as to how things have changed or not changed, as the case may be, but the photograph on the left here was taken in 1896, and you can see the outline of the hill. No trees as we have now, very open, windswept, barren, rock, firs, but the village itself is very much intact. It's there. You've got a couple of houses, Glenalua Lodge here. This is Glenalua Road coming up from the village, turning here, and back down to Hendry at the end. George's Avenue would have come up here. So you can see the changes. You've got Glenalua Heights have come in. Glenalua Terrace is here as well. So just getting on to the Talbots. The Talbot family, whose main seat was the Malahide Castle, came to Ireland in about the 13th century. Sir Reginald Talbot was granted lands by the Crown, Party Malahide, but they also were granted lands out in Killiney, being Roches Hill and the areas I've shown you on the maps there previously. The rent they had to pay was one goshawk, or a goosehawk. They were highly valued birds of prey, and the equivalent value in money back in the day was 6 shillings and 8 pence. So you can imagine the value that was held in the bird. So the property then remained in the Talbot family until about 1600, and then passed to Robert Kennedy, and then from Kennedy it came to the Malpas family, who then held the lands for a couple of centuries. In 1740, John Malpas was the gentleman who erected the obelisk on Killiney Hill, and he rebuilt Rochestown House in 1750, replacing an existing, probably would have been the existing Talbot Castle, and there was an existing turret or tower that remained there up until about 1900. There was certainly a photograph taken at that time. And then in 1766, there's a mention that about Killiney Castle, which was then called Loftus Hill, built by the Malpas family, who owned the soil. So that was they were the landlords who held the ground rents for the entire estate and would have sublet over the years. Catherine in 1789 was the only surviving child in the family, and she married a Richard Wogan Talbot, and afterwards who became the first Talbot de Malahide. So by a circuitous route, the lands came back to the Talbot family, and it's really from that period I'll be talking about. John Mapes died in 1797, and as I say, the estate passed to the Talbots then. At that point, Ballinclea, Beechwood and Bellevue, and possibly Plasnewyd had been built. I won't go through all of this with you, but the baronial line, the main baronial line for the Talbots, as I say, commenced. It was created in 1831. The first Baroness was Margaret O'Reilly, who was the widow of Richard Talbot, and then passed down the line. But we'll be talking about the, I'll just go back on the stage there. We'll be talking about Richard Gilbert Talbot of Ballinclea, who wasn't a baron in his own right, but he was a leg of the family who acquired the Killiney estates. Now, I was very kindly given access to the deeds. It was Irene and Dermot O'Connor, who live in Ballinclea House, allowed me to look at their deeds there, which would have been part of the estate. So that was a substantial amount of documents which confirm a lot of the items which would have turned up in various reports. But there was one interesting document there which gives kind of the lineage and the change of ownership within the Talbot family, ultimately starting with Richard Gilbert Talbot of Ballinclea, then passed to his son Edward Lister Kay, and he then passed away, went to his sister Mary Ann Eliza Talbot, and then went to the cousin as the line died off. If there wasn't a female heir, it would have gone to another part of the family, a cousin or the next male heir. And that case was Milo George Talbot. And he was married to Eva Joyce Talbot. Sorry, what am I doing here? So again, passing down through, we got to Lord Talbot de Malahide in 1951. Now again, we're kind of back into the Killiney relationship. I'm just going to the next slide here for you. So I'd say you've got Beechwood House, Ballinclea House and Woodlands are all sold off. By about 1930 or so, these are sales documents and the rental records documents which were turning up in the deeds. And you can see here that this is after the death of Milo George Talbot in 1931. These properties were probably sold off to generate cash to sustain the rest of the estate as the money ran out. So you've got Woodbine Cottage on Glenalua Road has been sold. Beechwood, one of the substantial properties, has been sold as well. You've got Uplands Cottage, again off Glenalua Road where the dairy was. And you've got Ballinclea is mentioned there as well. So at this point, a lot of the big properties in the area have been sold off. This is Eva Talbot, who was the mother of Milo and Rose, who ultimately inherited the properties and would have been the last landlords for the Killiney area. And they were buried up in Malahide, in a church, a graveyard in Malahide. This is just a letter from the agent to Eva Talbot. Now, Eva Talbot, she lived in Hampshire in the UK. And this is her agent in Dublin, basically giving her an update as to how the rental collections are going in Killiney. Most people are paying their rents. One individual, rental number 15, is in arrears. They mentioned talk of possible eviction, but he reckoned that she had substantial other interests in the area and would ultimately pay. This actually refers to Mary Maxwell, who ran a lot of the commercial business in the village. The Victoria Hotel, as I mentioned, the pub here would have been under the control as well. So she ultimately did pay up. She wasn't evicted. But I just thought there's a bit of a contrast in the letter here. At the end of the letter, at the end of the letter, he just mentions that, that's the right button, we've had an extraordinarily mild winter here, and the daffodils, crocus, etc. have been in bloom for some time, and also the garden seeds are doing well. I hope we will not have any late frost to spoil the good work. And this is dated 1943, and he goes on to say, the mild winter has also been very helpful in coping with the fuel problem. So, after the last Baron Talbot de Malahide passed away, the estate was inherited by Rose Maud Talbot, and the death duties that applied when they had to sell Malahide Castle were so substantial She had to sell the furniture. There was a deal that was going to be done with the state. That fell through, and a very large auction took place, and a lot of the family heirlooms, which had been there for centuries, were sold off. Some were bought by friends and relations and put back in. I believe there's quite a good collection in Malahide Castle, which I haven't been to yet, but I intend to get out there at some stage. So Rose, I think, had a bad taste in her mouth after the loss there, and she packed her bags and went off to Tasmania, where an earlier member of the family, a Richard Gilbert Talbot, had gone to set up a large sheep station in what was then called Van Diemen's Land, now Tasmania, a very successful sheep station, which he named Malahide. And in fact, the county in Tasmania is called Fingal, so really he brought a lot of Irish names with him, and that's still up and running, I believe, and very successful, and the family are still involved out there. Again, this is a document, I think, dated about 1897. This would be the Richard Gilbert Talbot's will, and he refers to the lands in Van Diemen's Land, which he was about to inherit at that point. So just a very brief history there. This is in 1884, it was 21,000 acres, so a very substantial station. And then you've got Richard Gilbert Talbot of Ballinclea. He was the second son, and he went out and took over the estate. So there's a strong Killiney connection with the Tasmanian estate out there. And then, as I say, Rose subsequently followed out, and she ran the estate. So just going back to the maps again, this is an overlay of that 1787 map that I showed you earlier, and I've put it onto, it's an old Ordnance Survey map of about 1900, and I don't know if it's clear from that, but the actual outlines of the fields are still, this before any substantial building took place. You can see the field plot layouts. The field layouts are practically spot on, so a highly accurate map. So anybody living within this area here can tell who was the occupant of their land back in 1787. And for instance, back there you've got the Mullins, well known, Roche's Hill. So there's Chris Mullen on plot 52. You've got Chris Mullen again here, and Andrew Mullen, who had a portion of land go right down into the village. You've got Patrick Darcy, who had a big area. That's actually the Killiney golf course there. So Darcy had the flatter, more arable land there. Unfortunately, the Mullins got the hard to be worked area up here. Rochestown estate is here, and it goes right down to the extent of showing the names of the individual fields. You had the barley field, the cotton field, and then over here you've got Humphrey Minchin, who had the ownership of the Killiney Castle at the time, including Killiney Hill and the obelisk. And that subsequently came out of the Talbot estate and became the property of Robert Warren around about 1835 or so, and Warren developed or attempted to develop further the Killiney Scalp William portion of the estate. The Talbots retained ownership of Ballinclea and, as I say, Roche's Hill. Just to bring you up to date, this is the overlay now on the current OS map. So, for instance, you've got the Ballinclea take, which included the Ballinclea estate here, also including Wyvern and Rock Lodge. You've got the Widow Connor, who had a portion of land up Claremont Road. Andrew Mullen had a portion of land there at the back of the village. And again, Widow Connor had a section of land. That's the bottom of Glenalua Road, Glenalua House, now Mount Prospect. And Andrew Mullen then had the vast proportion of Glenalua Road, which you can see here. So just to get to the houses, excuse me. Rochestown House, this was the main seat of the Malahide family, originally the Talbot family, now long demolished. Fine house, 3-storey house, and you can see that's the old ivy turret which remained from the old castle dating back to medieval times. Again, long gone. This is the map I showed you earlier, but again, that's the full breakdown. You can kind of make out some of the names there: the lawn, the shrubbery, the south lawn, east lawn. So all of the fields are all named and dimensioned. This is an overlay on a 1958 aerial photograph, and this is interesting because the development of the new housing estates was only beginning to happen in the late 50s and the early 60s. And you can see that this is Rochestown, obviously in the green here. You've got the roundabout at the pub. This is where Avondale Road now lies, just dotted in Avondale Road. You can see the beginnings of Avondale Road down here. This would be the Avondale Road roundabout at that location. Glenageary Road going on along this line. And Bellevue Estate just being commenced, being started to be built out in this location here, which would then ultimately cover all of the fields of the area. So, but at that point, the fields were very much still intact, and the layout of the estate really, even at that stage, hadn't changed, and probably reflected very much what was on the ground going back to the 11th, 12th centuries and possibly earlier. Again, there's Ballinclea, which is here. This is Ballinclea Road, the old Ballinclea Road coming up here. Bellevue, and this is Beechwood. Killiney Golf Course is just here. This is the Sally Glen Road, which then is fairly recent construction, and that was zoned out. Okay, I'll go on to the next. Now, just get a little more detail there. And Rochestown House, I think, may still have been there at that stage. I haven't quite established when it was demolished, but obviously it wasn't going to survive much longer with the development coming along. On to Ballinclea House. Ballinclea, again, a fine house built by the Talbots. Again, it doesn't exist, it's gone. But what does remain is the stable yards, which is a very unusual horseshoe-shaped stable yard. I think that section there is the back of the house, which is now gone. The house, I think, was in that location there. You can see the chimneys, quite a different kind of roofscape to the rest of the stable yards and the outhouses. So that's where the house was, but again, that was shaved off, I suppose you could say. But that building is still there, and that's now split into individual houses on Talbot Lane. That's as it was back in 1866. A fine house, a very substantial house, and you've got landscaped, laid out gardens. You've got the sweeping driveway coming from the junction at Rochestown Avenue down here, bringing you through the walnut woods. They were renowned. I think they were eventually cut down for firewood during the emergency. And again, there's the horseshoe shape with the main house, and you've got the a rear access, service access at the back. These are the remnants of the property which remain. Unfortunately, there's very little remaining of the main house itself. But you've on the left there, that's the stables, the horseshoe-shaped stables. You've got one of the lodges there on the right-hand side, and the original entrance gates are still there as well. This is again going back to that 1958 photograph. This is showing the Ballinclea. That's the Ballinclea house in that location there. This was part of the lands. Ballinclea Estate is located here. What you're looking at here is actually the construction of the reservoir, which was built in the middle of Ballinclea Estate, which is now just grassed over. You'd hardly know it exists, but this was obviously the first piece of major infrastructure to go in the area. And this is just I suppose a snapshot in time which captured that before the estate and the houses were built around it. And again, still the old field patterns are remaining there. Just a few newspaper cuttings relating to the house. Got to mention back in 1804, where the Earl of Clonmel was selling the property. In 1906, this is an obituary from a relation of the Talbot family, but to give kind of a rundown on who's who in the Talbot family there, you've got the beautiful Baroness Talbot de Malahide, whose portrait may be seen at Ballinclea House, whose daughter, the Honourable Elizabeth Talbot, married first George Mellifont of Ballinclea House, after whom, secondly, Ellis Cunliffe Lister Kay of Manningham Hall and Fairfield Hall. And the late Honourable Mrs. Talbot, besides Ballinclea House, also had two other nice residences, namely Beechwood and Plasnewyd in Killiney. So that was the extent of the main properties, and there were smaller properties then around the village, which we'll have a look at then as well. An auction of hay in 1827. Mrs. Mellifont, who married one of the Talbots, she's selling hay from her estate, and that was 120 cocks of hay. So, because to show it was obviously a very large holding she had there. And this is the sale notice for Ballinclea House, which appeared in the newspaper in 1933, describing the house as a modern house in an old world setting, adjoining Killiney golf links, approach to a well-grown timbered avenue, and stands on 2 acres, 2 receptions, 5 bedrooms, electric gas, new main drainage. Price £2,500, a bargain. Beechwood House, like I showed you earlier, this is on the 1760 map. So Beechwood House has a lot, although again, the third house in set, which is long since gone, but had been standing for centuries. This is from the 1878 map. That's Beechwood there and its site. Similar in terms of the layout, the estate. The house itself approached via a long sweeping avenue, which came off Ballinclea Road here, came across here and back to the front of the house. It had its own service stable buildings, which actually still remain. That's at the entrance to Killiney Golf Course there. You might be familiar with it. There's a group of 3 or 4 cottages. They were attached to Beechwood House, and the entrance to Beechwood and the lodge are still remaining as well. The house itself, I'd say, long gone. So you might be familiar with these properties. That's the, as you come off Ballinclea, the entrance up to the golf course. And this is the original entrance piers to the house itself. Getting very hard to find information on the original house itself. I've been looking for a photograph for a long time, and this is the best I've got to date. It's a wedding group, which was sent to us by one of our contributors of his family, his mother and father having their wedding ceremony in the Beechwood Hotel, as it was, in the late 40s up to about 1960 or so. And again, you just get a kind of an idea of the style of the house. It was a very substantial house and a very popular spot. I believe David Miller here, I think, remembers going to dances in the hotel back in the day. So again, a few newspaper cuttings. Beechwood House, splendid residence, fully furnished. It stands in a noble domain, commands magnificent views of Dublin Bay, Howth, Braehead and Wicklow Mountains, and possesses every suitable accommodation for a nobleman's family. The sitting rooms are large and lofty, and the bed chambers cheerful and well appointed. There are all the modern improvements and ample accommodation for domestics. The domain is interspersed with handsome shrubbery walks. There is capital stabling and coach house, large well-stocked garden, greenhouse and graperies, gate lodge at entrance and carriage drive. This is just interesting one from 1887. A burglar broke into Beechwood House and disturbed Mrs. Stewart, who was residing there at the time. But obviously he realised he'd woken the occupant and he scarpered. But the poor man, he left behind his boots. And just, unfortunately, this wasn't the first time this had happened in the area. There was a similar incident, I believe, a couple of months prior to that, where another failed robbery attempt and the burglar also left behind his boots. So the police reckoned they had a clue as to who the gentleman was. So I say it's the guy with no shoes, but I'm sure he was caught. Another theft of petrol, 1941. Petrol being hard to come by. A couple of individuals here broke into. Thomas F. O'Donnell was living in Beechwood at the time, and Edward Banville from the farm in Monkstown, William Walker from Bowley in Monkstown, and James Traynor, Hillview, Cabinteely, and Joseph McGee were convicted for robbing the petrol. Then 1950, we have an ad for the Beechwood Hotel, and it's completely reconstructed and modernised for 1950 because it had actually been burnt down the previous year. There was a tragic fire there in which a lady died. I think she was in fact the mother-in-law of the owner of the hotel. But that one, there's various reports on that fire. There's court cases, and you can read further about that on the website. I won't go into detail here. The hotel then closed around about 1960, and it became a sort of small industrial setup there, a factory, Rochestown, who manufactured industrial thermometers, recorders, controllers. And interestingly, Rochestown are still in operation, and the same family, I believe, are still involved with the current company. So I'm trying to make contact there again to see if there's some old family archives there. Perhaps we can turn up a couple of the photographs. So just getting down to Plasnewyd, now known as Rock Lodge. Plasnewyd it's a Welsh name, a little pretentious. It means posh new big house. So we're going to name your house the posh new big house. Why not? 1866. On this map, you can see there was a lake, a pleasure lake, as well as the wall garden. The driveway and the nicely stocked woods. And this lake remained here up until the construction of Rock Lodge, housing development itself. And there are many people here who still have memories of actually using that lake. This is just an overlay of the estate on the 1888 map overlaid on the current Ordnance Survey map. So what you've got here is, this is the old house which is now demolished. You've got the entrance from this is Killiney Hill Road coming down here, turning off Claremont, and these are the houses of Rock Lodge. So the lake, as you can see, is down the end of Rock Lodge and would have been in that location there. So if you're living there, you know there's a lake, or what, the remnants of a lake down below you, and I hope there aren't too many cracks in those houses. I'm sure it was well built. What does remain today is the wall garden is still intact, and the stable buildings are also still there. So you got little remnants here and there, and the old gate piers, in fact, are still there as well. But somebody's painted out Rock Lodge for some reason, but they are still there. There's Lindy Hall, resident on Glenalua Road, boating on Darkis's Lake. Darkis was one of the owners at one stage. And there's also a family called Disney, so sometimes it was called Disney's Lake. So you might hear Darkis Lake or Disney Lake.
Michael, Lindy's here. She's just here to your right.
Oh, hi, Lindy. There's Lindy. Yeah. So there's Lindy, who will, you can regale us later on with your memories of boating. Not a bit. You know it's you. And again, we've got an aerial shot here just of the current situation. What you've got, that's the old stable house, which is still intact. The new house here, which I think was built around about 1971 or so. So perhaps the original house was standing there till about that time. And again, I'd love to see if there's any photographs turned up on that. You've got the wall garden here as well, which is still intact. Just over the years, this is one example from the website. I do have records of the owners for all the other houses over the years, and you can have a look at that at your own good time. I won't bore you with all the details here, but it just gives you an idea. You know, starting from 1837, you've got Mrs. K. It's one of the Talbots, right the way through. There's darkest there, Mrs. Maxwell, who had the hotel. There's Disney afterwards, Michael Fitzgerald, and then up to 1960. So that information is all there to be had. Again, a few more little snippets on Rock Lodge, Plasnewyd. At one stage, it was a preparatory college. This was 1874, so it was a school, which I think is relocated from the Dublin city centre. It was a boarding school. In 1954, then the name has reverted to Rock Lodge, and it's standing on 7 acres. It gives a description of the house there. I've just put up these two images, two residents of the one property. This was H.P. Close, who died in 1918 in World War I, and one of the McKeevers, again related to, this is one of Mrs. Maxwell's children, also died in World War I in 1917. And what you find is that a lot of the history of the big houses have family members who have been killed in World War I, and this is like a common thread running through the histories of the large houses here. And I was just interested that there's two alone from the one house. And again, it's just worth some further investigation because there's an area to be explored. Now, getting back just to the other properties of the Talbot estate, apart from the large houses, this is, again, from the Bodleian Library. It's the actual rental records that the agents would have kept, and these are available for the years 1933 to about 1945, listing out the properties in Killiney where the rents were paid annually. And there's, I think, number 15 there is Mrs. Maxwell, who was a bit errant one of the years, but again, they caught up with her. So I've just transcribed some of that. So you may recognise some of the names here of the houses and the occupants. Killiney House, now Mount Prospect. The Haggard, which is like the stables at the back of the village here. Killiney Lodge, up Killiney Road, where the Stewarts now are. Claremont, Hasler's, which would have been Bel Air, that would have been the old dispensary. Wilmot and Ivy Cottage, the Glen on Killiney Road, where the dairy was. You've got St Mary's, Hendry at the end of Killiney, Plasnewyd, as we know, Bel Air Cottage just down below us here. The Victoria Hotel number 2 and Victoria Hotel number 1. So Victoria Hotel number 1, I believe, is where Jade's was down below us, which is now demolished and is the apartment scheme. Victoria Hotel number 2, I believe, is here where we are in the pub tonight. And somebody's got lazy about naming conventions. Sorry, let's go back there again. The post office was part of the estate. Eagle House, which is next door. 5 cottages on Killiney or on Talbot Road behind us. Flagstaff Hill. Mariposa Village just down below us here. The Quarry, 2 cottages, and we've also got the golf links. So the Talbot estate also retained ownership of the golf course at that stage, and a couple of other properties there further along Glenalua Road. Now, I've just included this image, and somebody might be able to throw some light on it. I have a notion as to what it might be, but we're looking here at the Burma Road, Killiney Hill Park. That's the car park at the top of Burma Road here, Killiney Hill Road here. You turn Savile Park Road here. And there's patterns in the park here which I have a feeling possibly are old allotments. This photograph's taken in 1958, so it may be a case that Killiney Park was split into allotments for local residents.
There were allotments there during the war.
Yeah, that's confirmed. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. That it looks like allotment size plots were set out there, so that the patterns were still visible even in 1958. Obviously, on a very dry summer, I would think, the way you can see the burnt out ground there. So that would all have been given over for allotments during the emergency. So again, we'd be interested to know if the same arises in the future. Can we all go and claim our allotments? So on that note, I'll conclude, and if anybody has any questions or anything they'd like to contribute, please feel free to do so.